The crash and the encounter. The night sky above planet Veros 3 burned with fire. A small alien ship, out of control, streaked across the atmosphere like a dying star. The wreckage spun, metal tearing apart, flames licking the air. And then, boom! The explosion shook the land, sending a shockwave through the dark forest. Smoke rose high, mixing with the thick fog that covered the ground. Somewhere inside that wreck, something, or someone, was still alive. The Omega Squad arrives. Not far from the crash, a team of elite human soldiers moved fast through the dense trees. They were the Omega Squad, Earth's most dangerous and skilled fighters, trained to handle the worst situations in the galaxy. Commander Dax, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a scar running across his cheek, raised his hand. His team stopped immediately, their weapons ready. "Stay alert," he ordered in a deep voice. If something survived that crash, it might not be friendly. The squad spread out, moving carefully toward the crash site. The ground was covered in burning debris, metal chunks still hissing from the heat. Sergeant Reed, a muscular soldier with sharp eyes, scanned the area with his rifle. "Doesn't look like a normal enemy ship," he muttered. "No markings. No insignia. Could be pirates," Lieutenant Vega said, adjusting her visor. "Or something worse." Then they heard it. A soft, weak sound, almost a whisper. A girl's voice. Dax raised a fist. The team froze. The voice came from inside the wreck. "Help." Dax exchanged glances with his team. This was unexpected. No alien enemy had ever asked for help before. Without hesitation, he stepped forward. The mysterious girl, inside the twisted metal, lying on the floor, was a young alien girl. She was no older than 16. Her silver-white hair was tangled, her skin covered in dust and bruises. But what caught Dax's attention were her eyes, glowing golden in the darkness. "Commander," Vega whispered, tightening her grip on her gun. She's not human." Dax already knew that. But she didn't look like the enemies they usually fought. She looked scared, weak, alone. The girl tried to sit up, but pain shot through her body. She gasped, clutching her side. Dax kneeled beside her, lowering his gun. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice firm but calm. The girl swallowed hard. Her lips trembled. "Leia," she whispered. Dax studied her face. She was afraid, but there was something else in her eyes. Desperation. "Leia, who are you? Why were you flying alone?" Tears welled up in her eyes. She opened her mouth, trying to speak, but the words barely came out. They took him." Dax frowned. "Who?" She grabbed his arm, her small fingers gripping tightly. "My father," she gasped. "They took my father." The moment she said it, the air grew colder. The squad felt it, an uneasy presence in the dark. The wind whispered through the broken trees. The fog thickened. Something was watching them. The enemy approaches. A sudden noise came from the shadows. A low, unnatural hum, like static in the air. The team turned, weapons raised. Dax stood up quickly. "Move out. Now." Vega helped lift Leia while Reed covered their backs. As they stepped away from the wreck, dark figures emerged from the mist. Tall, thin bodies, glowing red eyes. Their movements were wrong, jerky, unnatural, like puppets on invisible strings. Reed cursed under his breath. "What the hell are those?" Leia's breathing turned shaky. She clutched Dax's arm, fear in her eyes. "They found me," she whispered. And then, the figures attacked. The battle begins. The Omega Squad opened fire. Bright blue energy bolts lit up the night as bullets and plasma tore through the enemy. But the creatures didn't fall. They staggered back, then moved again, like broken machines refusing to die. One of them lunged toward Vega, arms outstretched. She ducked just in time, rolling and blasting it at close range. The creature shrieked, its body convulsing before collapsing. They're not organic. Vega shouted. There's some kind of. Shut up and shoot. Reed interrupted, emptying a full clip into another attacker. Dax grabbed Leia's wrist, pulling her behind him. We have to go. Now. Leia's golden eyes flashed, and for a second, something inside her changed. The air around her crackled with energy. She lifted a trembling hand. A pulse of golden light shot from her palm. The blast ripped through the enemy, sending 2 of them flying back. They twitched, then stopped moving. The squad froze. Everyone turned to look at Leia. She stared at her own hand, shocked and terrified. I didn't mean to, she whispered. Dax's mind raced. Who was she? Where did she get that power? There was no time for questions. More enemies were coming. Fall back to the ship, he ordered. We need to leave now. The squad ran, dragging Leia with them. Behind them, the shadowy creatures watched, their red eyes burning in the darkness. And then, as suddenly as they came, they vanished into the fog. The secret she hides. The atmosphere inside the Omega Squad's transport ship was tense. The engines hummed as they soared through the dark sky, heading toward their hidden base. Inside, the team sat in silence, weapons still in hand, minds still racing from the battle with the unknown creatures. Dax stood at the front, his arms crossed, eyes locked on the alien girl sitting in the corner. Leia. She looked fragile, curled up on the metal floor, hugging her knees. Her golden eyes, now dim, stared at her hands as if she was afraid of what they could do. She had unleashed something back there, something powerful, and even she didn't seem to understand it. Dax turned to Lieutenant Vega, who was busy checking the weapon racks. What do you think? He asked. Vega sighed, shaking her head. I think we just got involved in something way bigger than us. Dax agreed. Interrogation and distrust. A ship landed smoothly in Blackridge Base, a classified outpost hidden beneath the mountains of a distant moon. A place where the squad could regroup, resupply, and stay off the radar. Leia was escorted inside by 2 heavily armed guards. She didn't resist, didn't say a word, just followed like a shadow. Dax led her into a small, dimly lit room. A cold metal chair sat in the middle, waiting. She hesitated. I don't want to hurt anyone. She finally spoke, her voice soft. Dax motioned to the chair. Then start talking. She sat. Vega leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching closely. Sergeant Reed stood by the door, his hand on his gun, ready for anything. Dax sat across from her, eyes steady. Who are you? He asked. She hesitated before answering. My name is Leia Voss, she said. My father was a scientist. He worked on something important, something dangerous. Reed scoffed. Dangerous enough to make those things chase you. She nodded. I don't know what they are, Leia admitted, but I know they're looking for me. They're looking for my father. Dax leaned forward. Why? Leia's hands tightened into fists. Because of what he discovered. The room went silent. Vega exchanged a look with Dax. They had heard this story before. Scientists discovering things they shouldn't. Secrets powerful enough to start wars. But something about Leia was different. She wasn't just any scientist's daughter. She was something else. A shocking discovery. The door slid open, and Dr. Vance, the squad's chief scientist, walked in holding a datapad. His face was pale. I ran some tests, he said, placing the datapad on the table. You're going to want to see this. Dax picked up the datapad and froze. Leia's DNA scan was on the screen. Human, but not completely. Her genetic code had anomalies, things that didn't belong. Enhanced neural pathways, energy signatures unknown to any human or alien race on record. What the hell are you? Reed whispered. Leia closed her eyes. I don't know. Vega took a step closer. You don't know, she repeated, skeptical. Leia shook her head. My father never told me. He only said, That I was special. Dax exhaled sharply. That's not good enough. We need real answers. I don't have them, she said quietly. Something in her voice made them pause. She was just as lost as they were. A night of uncertainty. Dax ordered Laya to be kept under close watch, but not as a prisoner. She was placed in an empty barracks room, with only a small bed and a security camera watching from the corner. Vega stayed outside, arms folded, deep in thought. She's hiding something, Reed muttered beside her. Vega sighed. Or she really doesn't know. Reed shook his head. Doesn't change the fact that we're sitting on a bomb. If those things come back. They will, Vega said firmly. And she was right. The attack begins. 3:00 a.m. The base was quiet. The squad slept in their quarters, the only sound being the faint hum of the security systems. Then, alarms blared. Dax shot up from his bed, grabbing his weapon. Commander, a voice shouted over the comms. We have intruders. They're inside the base. Dax sprinted to the control room, Vega and Reed right behind him. On the security screens, shadowy figures moved through the corridors. The same creatures from the crash site. They found us, Vega hissed. Dax grabbed the radio. All units, gear up. We're under attack. The lights flickered. The base trembled. Something was wrong. Then, the cameras in Laya's room went black. Dax cursed. She's in danger. He ran. Laya's power awakens. By the time Dax reached her room, the door was already torn open. Inside, two of the creatures stood over Laya. Their red eyes burned, their bodies twitching unnaturally. Laya was backed against the wall, her eyes wide with fear. Dax raised his rifle. Get away from her. The creatures lunged. Before he could fire, Leah screamed. A wave of golden energy exploded from her body. The creatures were thrown across the room, their bodies disintegrating into black mist before they could even hit the ground. Dax stood frozen, gripping his gun, heart pounding. Laya was breathing heavily, her hands glowing with raw power. She looked at him, terrified. I didn't mean to, she whispered, her voice shaking. I don't know how I did that. Dax took a slow step forward. You're not just a scientist's daughter, he said. Are you? Laya's golden eyes flickered. No, she whispered. I'm not. The chase begins. The room still crackled with golden energy. Laya stood in the center, her breathing heavy, her eyes wide with terror. Her hands still flickered with traces of the mysterious power she had unleashed. The two shadowy creatures that had attacked her were gone, disintegrated into nothingness. Commander Dax lowered his rifle slightly, his heart still hammering. He had seen strange things in his time. Alien tech, unexplainable anomalies, genetically enhanced soldiers, but nothing like this. The girl in front of him had just obliterated two enemies without touching them. What the hell are you? He finally asked. Leah shook her head, tears welling in her golden eyes. I don't know. The alarm sirens still wailed. Footsteps pounded outside as the rest of the Omega squad rushed toward them. Lieutenant Vega was the first to arrive, rifle raised, scanning the room. Sergeant Reed was right behind her. Their eyes flicked between Laya, Dax, and the burn marks on the floor where the creatures had once stood. Vega's fingers tensed around her trigger. What just happened? Dax exhaled. Leah happened, but there was no time to process. Over the intercom, a soldier's panicked voice cut through the noise. Commander, we're being overrun. There are too many of them. They're inside the base. Dax clenched his jaw. How many? A brief pause. Then, static. The voice came back, shaking with fear. All of them. Nowhere left to hide. A security screen in the hallway flickered to life. The entire base was swarming with the enemy. Dozens of them. No, hundreds. They moved like ghosts, their twisted, skeletal forms crawling through corridors, appearing and disappearing in the flickering lights. Blackridge Base was supposed to be a hidden sanctuary, but these creatures had found them anyway. And now, they weren't just here for Leia. They were here to kill everyone. The squad's escape plan. Dax snapped into action. Everyone fall back to the hangar. We're evacuating. Now. Vega moved beside him, gripping her rifle. Commander, the base is already compromised. We won't make it out alive unless... Dax turned to Leia. Unless she helps us. Leia flinched. I don't know how. You didn't know how before, Reed grunted, reloading his rifle. Didn't stop you from blowing up 2 of those things. Leia's hands trembled. That was an accident. Vega narrowed her eyes. Then let's hope you have another one. Dax placed a firm hand on Leia's shoulder. You don't have a choice, kid. If you don't use whatever's inside you, we're all dead. Leia swallowed hard. Then she nodded. The gauntlet through hell. The squad moved fast. They sprinted through the dark corridors, weapons raised, shadows shifting around them. The creatures weren't normal enemies. They crawled along walls, their red eyes glowing, their movements unnatural, twitching, unpredictable. The first wave came, 10 of them, moving like a black tide. Reed fired first, his bullets punching through their chests, but it wasn't enough. The creatures kept coming. Dax tackled Leia down just as one of the creatures lunged at her, claws swiping inches from her throat. Vega let out a battle cry, slicing her combat knife straight through its head. Move-y, Dax roared. The squad fought their way forward, but the closer they got to the hangar, the more creatures appeared. Leia felt her chest tighten. She could feel them. It was like a whisper inside her mind, something calling to her. Suddenly, another creature lunged at Dax from behind, too fast for him to react. Leia screamed, and before she could even think, her hands shot forward. A wave of golden energy erupted, sending the enemy flying back, slamming against the steel walls. Leia gasped, staring at her own hands. The creatures hesitated. For the first time, they feared her. The betrayal. The squad reached the hangar, where their extraction ship sat waiting. But just as they prepared to board, gunfire rang out. Dax spun around, just in time to see one of their own soldiers fall to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. Standing behind the fallen body was Lieutenant Kane, his rifle still smoking. Leia froze. What? Kane lifted his weapon again, aiming it at her. I'm sorry, he said, voice calm. But I can't let you leave. Dax's stomach twisted with rage. You betrayed us. Kane sighed. You don't get it, do you? The people hunting Leia aren't just aliens. He gestured toward the sky. A massive warship loomed above the planet, one that didn't belong to the enemy. It belonged to humans. The government knew about her all along, Kane said. They want her. Alive. Leia's heart pounded. No. Dax clenched his fists. You sold us out. Kane smiled bitterly. It was never personal. Dax pulled the trigger. Kane's eyes widened in shock as a bullet tore through his chest. He staggered back, collapsing to the floor. Dax looked down at his fallen squadmate, his hands tightening into fists. Then, from the corner of his eye, the creatures were still coming, and the human warship above was preparing to land. They had seconds to escape. EVERYONE ship. Now, escape into the unknown. The squad boarded the ship as gunfire, screeches, and explosions shook the hangar. Leia stumbled inside, panting. She turned back one last time, and locked eyes with the dark creatures in the distance. One of them, a taller figure, different from the rest, stood perfectly still. Watching her, it tilted its head. And then, for the first time, Leia heard a voice inside her mind. A whisper. A warning. You cannot run forever, child of two worlds. The doors slammed shut. The ship blasted into the sky. Leia's whole body trembled. Dax placed a hand on her shoulder. We're not done yet. She looked up at him. She already knew. This was only the beginning. The hidden past and the betrayal. The stars stretched endlessly outside the ship's cockpit window, but inside, the air was heavy with tension. Commander Dax stood at the controls, gripping the steering console harder than necessary. The escape had been too close. Too many losses, too many unanswered questions. Behind him, Leia sat in silence, her back pressed against the cold metal walls of the ship's interior. Her golden eyes stared at the floor, haunted by everything that had happened. She wasn't just running from alien hunters. Humans were after her too. Her own kind. But why? A dangerous revelation. Lieutenant Vega walked into the cockpit, her expression tight. She glanced at Leia, then back to Dax. "We need answers," Vega said flatly. "Now." Dax nodded. Agreed. Turning back to Leia, he crouched down in front of her. His tone was calm but firm. "Back at the base, those things, those creatures, they spoke to you, didn't they?" Leia hesitated, hugging her arms. "Leia," Dax pressed, softer this time. "We can't protect you if we don't know what's happening." Leia's breath shook. Then, finally, she whispered something that made the entire room go silent. "They called me child of two worlds." Dax stiffened. So did Vega. "What does that mean?" Vega asked cautiously. Leia slowly lifted her eyes, and for the first time, she looked truly terrified. "I think it means I'm not just human." A long silence followed. Reed, who had just entered the room, snorted. "Yeah, no kidding." But Dax wasn't laughing. His mind raced, piecing the puzzle together. Her DNA had anomalies. She could generate energy unlike anything they had seen. And now, the creatures, their unknown enemy, claimed she belonged to both worlds. What if she really wasn't just human? And if she wasn't, then who, or what, was her father? Leia swallowed hard. "My father, he always told me to hide," she whispered. "He said people would come for me if they ever found out what I was." Dax frowned. "And what are you?" Leia's lips trembled. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I think he did." Dax exchanged a look with Vega. There was only one way to find out the truth. They had to find her father. A dangerous journey. The ship hurtled through space, heading toward the last known location of Leia's father, a remote space station hidden deep in an uncharted sector. Dr. Vance, the squad's scientist, sat at his console, running deeper scans on Leia's DNA. His eyes widened as he analyzed the results. "Commander," Vance called, "you might want to see this." Dax and Vega stepped forward. Vance pointed at the screen. "Her DNA isn't just part alien. It's something else entirely." "Define something else," Dax said, arms crossed. Vance hesitated. "It's not on record anywhere. Whatever species she's connected to, it's not one we've ever cataloged before. And here's the kicker, her cells. They self-repair faster than anything I've seen. Almost like they're designed to adapt to anything." Dax narrowed his eyes. "Like a living weapon." Vance nodded grimly. Leia sat quietly, feeling their eyes on her. "Are you afraid of me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vega looked at her for a long moment. Then, without hesitation, she shook her head. "No," Vega said, "but I think everyone else is." Leia's heart sank. Maybe that was why they were hunting her. Betrayal in the shadows. As the ship approached the hidden station, an eerie silence filled the cockpit. "We're here," Dax announced, adjusting the controls. The station loomed ahead, dark and lifeless, floating in the void. Leia's stomach twisted. "This is where my father was last seen?" she asked. Vance nodded. "According to our data, yes. But," he tapped his console, "there's no sign of life." Something was wrong. Dax pulled his rifle off his back. "Gear up. We're going in." The squad suited up, stepping onto the landing bay of the silent station. The air smelled stale, the metal walls coated in frost. Lights flickered as if the power had been struggling for years. And then, a gun cocked behind them. "Drop your weapons." The squad froze. Turning slowly, Dax saw a group of heavily armed human soldiers emerging from the shadows, and at the center of them stood Lieutenant Kane, still alive and smiling. Vega's blood ran cold. "I knew we should have shot him twice." Kane laughed, his rifle steady. "Oh, you did shoot me. But unlike most people, I don't die easy." Dax's grip on his weapon tightened. "You led us here." Kane smirked. "Not exactly. You led yourselves here. I just waited." Leia stepped back, fear creeping into her chest. "You're working for them," she whispered. "For the ones who want to take me." Kane's smirk deepened. "Correction. I'm working for the people who want to own you." The squad tensed. Vega whispered to Dax, "If we're gonna fight, we need an opening." Kane sighed dramatically. Now, let's not make this violent. I have orders to bring Leia in alive. But you?" His smirk faded. "You're all expendable." Then, the lights in the station flickered violently, and from the dark corridors behind Kane's men, something moved. Something was waking up. The air turned cold. A low, guttural growl echoed through the station. The human soldiers turned in confusion. And then, the shadows erupted. Dark, twisted figures burst from the halls, red eyes glowing. The same creatures from before, but bigger, stronger. And they were hungry. Kane's eyes widened. What the hell? Chaos exploded. The creatures attacked Kane's men first, tearing through their armor like paper. Gunfire rang out. Screams filled the station. Dax grabbed Leia's arm. "Run." The squad sprinted back toward their ship, dodging bullets, avoiding the monstrous creatures. Kane's men were being torn apart. But as they reached the ship, Vega looked back and saw something that made her stomach drop. One of the creatures wasn't attacking Leia. It was bowing to her. The truth about her father. The Station of Nightmares. Screams echoed through the dark corridors of the abandoned space station. Gunfire lit up the halls as Kane's soldiers fought for their lives against the creatures emerging from the shadows. But something was wrong. Dax saw it. So did Vega. The creatures weren't attacking Leia. One of them, larger than the rest, standing nearly 7 feet tall, with jagged black skin and piercing red eyes, was bowing to her. Leia's breath caught in her throat. What is it doing?" she whispered. The creature tilted its head, its glowing eyes locked onto hers. Then, in a voice that sent a chill through every bone in her body, it spoke. "Daughter of Voss, we have been waiting." Leia's entire body went cold. Dax's gun snapped up immediately. "The hell do you mean by that?" The creature didn't flinch. It remained kneeling before Leia, its eerie voice dripping with something ancient, something beyond human understanding. "He called for you," it said. "Your father. He left his mark upon you." Leia's heart pounded. Her father. He was alive. Somewhere, somehow, he had sent these things after her. But why? A gunshot rang out. Kane, still alive, still fighting, shot the kneeling creature in the head. The bullet did nothing. The creature turned its gaze toward him. And then, without moving, without touching him, Kane started to choke. His feet lifted off the ground. Kane's face twisted in agony, his mouth open in a silent scream. His body contorted, as if unseen hands were crushing his ribs. Dax didn't wait. "Elie, Movi." He grabbed her arm and pulled her away, Vega and Reed covering their escape as the station erupted into chaos. They had to get out, and they had to find her father, before it was too late. A message from the past. The squad raced back to the ship, the distant roars of the creatures shaking the walls. Dax slammed his fist on the control panel, forcing the engines to ignite. As they lifted off, Leia's golden eyes never left the station. Somewhere inside, her father's secrets were waiting. But how could she face the truth? As if answering her question, a holographic display suddenly flickered to life. An old message, a recording. And then, a voice. "Leia, if you're hearing this, then you're running. And I'm sorry." Leia gasped. "Dad?" The voice continued, calm but filled with regret. "I never wanted this for you, but there are things I have done, things that cannot be undone." The recording glitched, static distorting the image, but Leia could still see his face. Dr. Elias Voss. Her father, a man who once worked for humanity's most classified research division, a man who had vanished without a trace. **** Leia, listen to me. The people after you. ***, both human and alien. They don't fear what I discovered. They fear you. Because you are the key to everything." Leia's pulse pounded in her ears. "You were created for a purpose, but I refused to let them use you, so I ran." She stared at the message, her hands trembling. Created? Not born. Her father's voice turned desperate. "They will never stop hunting you, Leia, because inside you is something even I don't fully understand, something that can change everything." Dax exhaled. What the hell does that mean? Leia's throat was dry. She could barely breathe. The hologram flickered one last time. "Find me. Before they do." And then it vanished. A deep silence filled the room. Reed let out a low whistle. "Well, that's a whole new level of screwed up." Dax rubbed a hand over his face. "We need a new plan." But Vega was still watching Leia. Leia, who sat frozen, her entire reality shattered in one message. She wasn't just running for her life. She was running from the truth. The final betrayal. Before anyone could process the message further, the ship's radar blared a warning. "Commander," Vega said, checking the screen. "We've got incoming." Dax turned. His stomach dropped. 3 warships. Human warships. They had been found. A voice crackled over the ship's comms. "Omega Squad, stand down. You are harboring classified property of the United Earth Council. Surrender, Leia Voss, or you will be terminated." Dax clenched his jaw. Vega cursed. "They're not even trying to hide it, huh? They don't see her as a person. Just property." Leia felt like she couldn't breathe. Was this why her father had run? Why he had hidden her? She wasn't a person to them. She was a weapon. Dax's voice was ice cold. "Like hell, we're handing her over." The warships locked onto them. Reed checked the controls. "We're outgunned, Commander." Dax's fists clenched. "Then we do the only thing we can." Vega raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" Dax turned to Leia. "We find your father, and we end this." Leia blinked. "But how? Where do we go?" Dax took a deep breath. "Your dad left that message for a reason. He's leading us somewhere." He pointed to the holographic display, where a single set of coordinates had been left behind. Leia's heart pounded. Those coordinates, that location, it led straight into the dead zone, a place where no one returned from. And if her father was there, then so was the final answer. The final battle and her awakening. The dead zone. A place of no return. The stars disappeared. As Omega Squad's ship drifted into the dead zone, the galaxy itself seemed to vanish behind them. The void was different here. Darker, emptier, suffocating. The ship's radar flickered, struggling to scan the space ahead. Leia sat in the cockpit, staring at the screen, her golden eyes reflecting the growing darkness. Somewhere in this cursed region, her father was waiting. Somewhere in this place, the final answer would be found. Dax tightened his grip on the controls. "This place feels wrong." Vega, standing beside him, frowned. "There's no trace of planets, stations, or even wreckage. It's like space itself just stops." Laya's heart pounded. Her father had left a message leading them here. But why? Was it a trap? Or was this the last piece of the puzzle? A sudden shockwave rattled the ship. The radar screens went completely dark. And then, a voice, whispering, calling. "Leah, you have come." Leah gasped. Dax turned sharply. What is it? But only Leah could hear it. A voice she had never heard before, but somehow recognized. She clutched her chest. The energy inside her was responding. Something was waiting for her. Something deep within the void. And it wanted her to find it. The descent into the unknown. Suddenly, the darkness ahead shimmered. A structure, massive, ancient, hidden in the void, materialized before their eyes. It wasn't natural. It wasn't human. It was something else. Reed let out a low whistle. Well, that sure as hell ain't a normal space station. Dax narrowed his eyes. No, it's not. Leah swallowed hard. She knew this place, not from memories, but from her blood. Her father had sent her here for a reason. "We need to go inside," she said, her voice trembling but determined. Dax hesitated. "You sure about that, kid?" Leah looked up at him. "I don't think we have a choice." Dax sighed, running a hand over his face. "All right. Gear up. We're going in." The awakening of Leah Voss. The inside of the station was silent. Massive, towering corridors stretched out in all directions, glowing with an eerie golden light. Strange symbols covered the walls. Ancient, unreadable, yet oddly familiar. Leah's footsteps echoed as she led the squad forward. With every step, she felt something pulling her deeper inside. Something alive. Then they reached it. A chamber. At the center of the chamber, a massive glass structure pulsed with golden energy. And inside, a man. Leah's breath caught in her throat. "Dad?" The figure inside the glass was Dr. Elias Voss. But he wasn't human anymore. His eyes, once normal, now glowed with golden energy, just like Leah's. His body was different, enhanced, something beyond human evolution. Vega cursed. What the hell did he do to himself? Leah stepped forward, placing a trembling hand on the glass. The moment she touched it, a shockwave of golden light exploded outward. The entire station came to life. The truth of her creation. The room filled with holographic projections, memories, data, experiments from long ago. And then her father spoke. "Leah, my beautiful daughter, if you are seeing this, then I have failed." Leah's hand shook. Failed. The projection shifted. Images of her father's past experiments flickered across the room. Humans. Aliens. Genetic engineering beyond comprehension. Dr. Voss's voice was filled with regret. "You were never meant to be a weapon. You were meant to be the bridge. The evolution of both species." Leah froze. "I created you, Leah. You are not just human. You are not just alien. You are the first of something new." Her heart stopped. She wasn't just a girl. She was a creation. An experiment. Her body, her powers, they weren't natural. They were designed. Dax clenched his jaw. "Jesus." Vega whispered, "She's not just powerful. She's something the galaxy has never seen before." Leah felt her legs weaken. Everything, her entire life, had been a lie. The enemy arrives. A final showdown. Before she could process it, alarms blared throughout the station. A deep, inhuman voice filled the air. "The vessel has awakened. Eliminate the imperfect one." The walls trembled. The shadowy creatures emerged from the darkness. Hundreds of them. They hadn't come for her before, because she hadn't been ready. But now she was a threat. Dax cocked his gun. "Looks like we're fighting our way out of here." Leah felt something inside her shift. A power she had never touched before surged through her veins. She looked down at her hands, glowing, crackling, alive. The voice in her head returned. Awaken, child of two worlds. She clenched her fists. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't running anymore. She was ready to fight. The battle begins. The creatures charged. Dax, Vega, and Reed opened fire, taking down as many as they could. But they kept coming. Laia stepped forward. And then, she let go. A golden explosion of energy erupted from her body, tearing through the creatures like a storm. They screamed, disintegrating in the air. Laia's entire body glowed, her power no longer something she feared, but something she commanded. Vega watched in awe. Holy. Dax pulled her forward. We're moving. Now. The squad ran toward the ship, the station collapsing behind them. Laia turned one last time, locking eyes with the glass structure holding her father. He was still alive. But he wasn't human anymore. And he was never coming back. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Then she turned and ran. The final choice and escape. The station collapses. Fire and destruction consumed the ancient station. Metal beams snapped like bones, entire walls crumbling into the void. Laia ran, her heart hammering as explosions shook the ground beneath her. Her power pulsed through her veins, raw and untamed. Behind her, the shadowy creatures shrieked as they were swallowed by golden energy. Her energy. Ahead, Dax, Vega, and Reed sprinted toward their ship, dodging falling debris and enemy fire. But Leah, she hesitated, because behind her, still trapped in the glowing containment chamber, was her father. A daughter's dilemma. The holographic message still flickered in the air, frozen on her father's last words. Find me. Before they do. Laia's throat tightened. She had found him. But it was too late. Dr. Elias Voss, her creator, her father, was no longer human. His eyes glowed just like hers. His body had changed. He had become something else. And yet, he was still alive. She turned back, feet skidding on the trembling floor. Dax noticed. Laia, he shouted over the explosions. We have to go. But Laia wasn't moving. She stared at her father, her chest rising and falling rapidly. This was the man who had hidden her, who had protected her, who had created her. And now he was trapped. Her fingers twitched. The power inside her burned, a wild, chaotic force demanding to be used. She could break the glass. She could free him. But was he still the same man? Or had he become something worse? Something beyond saving? Her father's eyes slowly opened, and he looked directly at her. Laia's breath caught. For a second, there was recognition. Then, his mouth moved. A whisper, too faint to hear over the destruction around them. But she knew what he was saying. Run. Her hands trembled. Her vision blurred. Her choice was clear. Leah turned, and she ran. The final escape. The squad's ship rumbled to life, engines firing as Dax yanked the controls. Leah jumped onto the ramp, Vega grabbing her arm and pulling her inside. The moment she was on board, Dax shouted, "We're getting the hell out of here." The ship's thrusters roared, lifting them into the air just as the entire station collapsed into itself, a golden explosion rippling through space. The force slammed into them, sending the ship into a violent spiral. "Stabilizers failing," Reed yelled. Dax gritted his teeth. "Hold on." The ship rocketed through the chaos, dodging flaming debris, the controls barely holding together. Laia clenched her fists, her body still crackling with the power she had unleashed. Her father was gone. The station was gone. And now, there was only one thing left to do. Survive. The war that waits. The ship tore through the void, breaking free of the dead zone. For a few seconds, just a few, there was only silence. Then the alarms blared. Vega cursed. "We've got company." Laia looked at the radar. Her stomach dropped. A fleet of warships. And not just any warships. Human. United Earth Council. They were waiting for them. And they had no escape. A voice crackled over the comms, sharp and cold. This is Admiral Kezra of the United Earth Council. You are harboring classified property. Surrender Leah Voss immediately. Dax slammed his fist on the console. They were never gonna let her go. Reed clenched his jaw. So what do we do? Leia stood up. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid. Her father had created her for a reason. Not as a weapon. Not as an experiment. But as something new. Something stronger. She turned to the squad, her golden eyes burning. We end this. Dax raised an eyebrow. That's a big statement, kid. Leah exhaled. I'm not running anymore. Vega smirked. Good. Dax grinned. All right then. He cracked his neck, flipping the weapon systems online. Let's show them what a mistake it was to come after us.